Welcome to tonight's presentation, Democracy is Under a Full-Blown Attack, presented by the Democrats of Greater Tucson. This is a fundraiser for us to help Democrats get elected, and we thank you for your support. Frank Figliuzzi is a national security commentator and regular guest on NBC News and MSNBC. He was the assistant director for Counterintelligence at the FBI, where he served for 25 years. I recommend that you visit frankfigliuzzi.com, and you'll see that he's the author of a book called The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence. And the book is the FBI's field-tested playbook for unlocking individual and organizational excellence. Frank is prolific and has numerous videos, podcasts, radio appearances, and photos on his site. Tonight, Frank will discuss the fascist threats to our freedom and democracy as we enter the 2020 election season. And with that, Frank, the floor is yours.
Federal agencies. The idea, of course, goes back to the jittery days of the Cold War, the same Cold War we find ourselves in today. That same designated survivor drill still takes place every year across key agencies during the State of the Union. If a hostile foreign power or a terrorist organization were to drop a nuke on Washington, the designated survivors would be spared the carnage, theoretically, and could carry on the nation's vital business from there. We were a Noah's Ark for the nuclear age, America's last, best, desperate hope, however remote the threat of Armageddon might have been. Well, the notion of designated survivor is our theme tonight because our democracy and democracies around the world are under full-blown attack from both foreign and domestic adversaries. And if I convey nothing else tonight, if you hear nothing else I have to say, let it please be this, that each one of us in this meeting tonight must become designated survivors. People capable of defending and preserving our democracy under withering attack and carrying it forward to the next generation. Tonight, our brothers and sisters in Ukraine are sacrificing their lives for their freedom. While here at home, we couldn't agree on the inconvenience of wearing a mask during a deadly pandemic, or on getting a vaccine or a booster that's been proven to protect us and the most vulnerable around us from hospitalization and death. An astonishing percentage of Americans happen to think the world is run by an elite group of Satan-worshiping pedophile cannibals. We certainly can't even agree on who won the last presidential election. And at least 800 Americans decided to violently assault our nation's capital to try and prevent the peaceful transition of power. A recent University of Massachusetts Amherst poll found that only 21% of Republicans believe that Joe Biden's victory was legitimate. Despite dozens of court challenges across the country finding no fraud, despite Trump Attorney General William Barr telling his boss that the Department of Justice could not find fraud, despite the head of cybersecurity for Trump at the Department of Homeland Security saying it was the most secure vote in our history, the vast majority of the GOP believe a lie. And 30% of Republicans agreed with the following statement. This is a survey from the Public Religion Research Institute. Quote, because things have gotten so off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. 30% of Republicans agree with that statement. For an increasing number of Americans, that violence they think may be required to save our country may also mean violent acts against minorities, Blacks, Latinos, Asians, Muslims, because of a belief in something called white replacement theory, the twisted notion that the increasing number of minorities in our country is the result of a deliberate strategy to replace white voters and replace white European American culture. That's what happened last weekend in Buffalo, New York. An 18-year-old terrorist deliberately chose to kill blacks in an attempt, as he explained in his manifesto, to intimidate minorities and to get them to think about going back to where they came from, whatever that means, despite the fact that it's likely that most of those victims were from Buffalo, New York. It's the same thing that happened at the Walmart in El Paso, Texas, the same thing that happened at the Charleston, South Carolina church, the same thing that happened at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, and the same thing that happened at a mosque in New Zealand by a shooter that became the role model for the Buffalo shooter. You may ask, what's all this have to do with democracy being in trouble? It has everything to do with that. The people who believe that America must be white, that everyone who is not white poses a threat, those violent extremists aren't American. They don't believe in our democracy. The people arrested so far for January 6th, they don't believe in our democratic processes. The Buffalo shooter, his position was quite clear in his manifesto. He said, quote, "I am a fascist," unquote. We need to believe people when they tell us who they are, and they're telling us who they are. It's believed that it was Voltaire who made the following statement. He said, quote, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." Think about that when you're wondering why we're in such jeopardy. While Ukrainians fight for democracy, people like Tucker Carlson on Fox News ask us why we should care about something 5,000 miles away. What's someone else's business? Why do we want to invest billions of dollars in someone else's problems? And what's wrong with an authoritarian government? That's what the far right is asking. The former and twice impeached president has praised Putin, Vladimir Putin, as, quote, "a savvy genius." And I say shame on all of them for not recognizing the threats to democracy when they see them. Putin has invaded Ukraine for a host of reasons, but the timing of this is not random. For 4 years, President Trump and those around him worked hard to weaken NATO and even question why it should exist. Trump gave legitimacy to our adversary in Putin, going so far as to say, you'll remember at that Helsinki, Finland summit, that he sided with Putin over the evidence provided to him by his own U.S. intelligence agencies, that Putin had attempted to interfere in our election. He said, no, I don't know why he would do that. And Putin and his intelligence services, through relentless online propaganda, helped to bring Americans to a point of chaos, of insurrection at our Capitol, of distrust in our institutions and in each other. Special counsel Robert Mueller indicted 24 Russians, including 12 Russian intelligence officers, for interfering in our election on behalf of Trump. Putin thought NATO would collapse under pressure if he invaded Ukraine. He was wrong. He thinks we will collapse as a divided nation, and I pray he is wrong. But it's up to us to ensure that doesn't happen. There are signs of hope tonight. Even some authoritarian world leaders have denounced Putin's move into Ukraine. Thousands of people here and abroad, even in Russia, have hit the streets to protest the invasion of Ukraine. NATO has activated its defense force for the first time in history. Sweden now and Finland have applied for NATO memberships, and many GOP leaders realize they would be on the wrong side of history if they continued to support Putin, and they rapidly have tried to reverse their stance in praise of Putin. Wouldn't it be the height of irony if it took watching a young, vibrant democracy like Ukraine fight for its existence to remind us what we should stand for. Wouldn't it be ironic if it took a republic like Ukraine, 5,000 miles away, to open our eyes to the threat we face right here at home? But for now, the positive signs, the signs of hope, are outweighed by the signs that we're headed in the wrong direction. Within hours of the Buffalo shooting, Elise Stefanik, a congresswoman from New York, doubled down on her belief in white replacement theory as a strategy to change the voting population. She did that with a post on Twitter. Similarly, much closer to home, a state senator from Arizona, Wendy Rogers, implied on a Telegram post that the Buffalo shooting was really the work of the federal government. Throughout the United States, there is a concerted and deliberate strategy to nullify minority voting. It's not increasing ballot security. It's minimizing the voice of minority voters. Atlanta in Fulton County, Houston in Harris County, and of course, in the state of Arizona. The Supreme Court has spoken on 2 Arizona laws by ruling that only relatives and caregivers can collect absentee ballots, and that any ballot cast in the wrong precinct must be discarded. In Spalding County, Georgia, a Republican-controlled election board decided to cancel Sunday voting. As you know, Sunday is often the only day of the week when a Black or Latino blue-collar worker, maybe working 2 jobs or double shifts, can make their way to the polls. How did we get here? Well, someday there will be graduate level courses on how America got to this point. There may already be graduate level studies. I spend hours each week trying to come to grips with this on national television and in my regular column for MSNBC Daily. Surely factors like racism, immigration, socioeconomic disparities, job elimination, fear, ignorance, unregulated social media platforms, foreign intelligence service operations, the 24-hour for-profit cable news cycle, immoral, power-hungry leaders, all played a role in getting us here. The question may no longer be so much about how we got here, but how we get out of this mess. So let me do what I try to do when I'm writing or on TV and dealing with complex issues. Let me try as best as I can to break this down. I wrote a book that isn't just about the FBI. It's about how the FBI preserves its own values while trying to preserve the nation's values. And while I had no idea the book would be released in early January of last year, immediately following the attack on the Capitol, I did understand that our country seemed to no longer have a common collective set of values. I also was growing quite concerned that the former president was so denigrating the institutions of government, from the CIA to the CDC, including my old agency, the FBI, and the professionals who come to work every day there in those institutions. I felt that the president at the time was so eroding the American values that are wrapped up in those institutions that I decided to write the book, not only taking you inside the FBI, but more importantly, a book that might help individuals, companies, communities, and organizations identify and preserve what they stand for. The book I wrote is broken down simply into 7 chapters that contain what I call the 7 C's of values preservation, or what many managerial experts call values-based leadership. Values-based leadership and performance. The theory is pretty simple. It's the theory that people, teams, even nations that are based on a value system a collectively accepted value system, are more likely to succeed and to endure. I'm not going to go through each of the 7 C's tonight, but I will touch on the ones I believe are most pertinent for what we're facing as a country tonight. I deliberately chose the first C to be code. Code. Code means your code of conduct, what you will and won't do. And it's based on your core values. Everything else flows from your code. I believe our country is losing its code, what it will and won't do, what we will and won't do, because it's losing its core values. As I watched the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, that's what went through my mind. We've lost it. We've lost our code. Our core values are no longer in common. Our country can restore its common values, the rule of law, the Constitution, 3 equal branches of government, respect for a credible court system. But it will take education, strong leadership, and discipline. The second of the 7 C's is something called conservancy. The idea that we all belong to a conservancy, something greater than ourselves that we're responsible for maintaining. And the notion that preserving our values is a team sport. We are supposed to be in this together. Values preservation isn't someone else's job. Not just the police department, not just the FBI, not the courts, certainly not many of our elected representatives who seem to show no interest in preserving a conservancy. The responsibility for preserving what matters most to an organization, an agency, a country, belongs to each of its members. The fact that you are here tonight as part of this group, this organization, tells me you get it. You understand that we're supposed to be part of something greater than ourselves if we're going to preserve our democracy. Those folks who assaulted Capitol police officers, the folks who wanted to hang Mike Pence, kill Nancy Pelosi, stop the Electoral College ratification, they aren't part of a conservancy. They were part of a coup, the exact opposite of a conservancy. In the FBI, everyone who aspires to leadership must take part in continual audits and reviews of programs and personnel throughout the FBI. They also must be assigned internal affairs investigations. Why? Why does a successful organization do that? Because they're all taught to be conservators of the values of the organization. The third of my 7 C's is clarity. We are a population in great need of clarity, strong voices and messaging that clearly spell out what is right and what is wrong. Voices that are louder than the voices calling for discord and chaos and hatred and racism. That's what's happening now in America. Voices are needed that remind us what the rules of democracy are. Voices can be teachers who educate what the Constitution is really all about, leaders who demand evidence instead of conspiracy theories, scientists who publicly defend their data, members of clergy who tell their congregations what a moral code requires, and lawmakers who are unafraid of denouncing their own when those colleagues threaten democracy. The fourth C is consequences. No one likes consequences, but consequences mean accountability. Consequences send the message that the greater good is more important than the path some smaller group decided to take. And when that path poses an existential threat to the greater good of our democracy, when leaders organize a violent coup attempt at the Capitol, when they lie about the outcome of a legitimate election, when they embrace the support of our adversaries, when they permit on their platforms lies that incite violence against minorities, I say that all calls for consequences, strong and lasting accountability. I'll skip now to the last of the 7 C's. I deliberately chose to end my book with a chapter called Consistency. Consistency. Now, please don't confuse consistency with rigidity or the inability to change. So, for example, people who believe in white replacement theory, they fear change. They don't want any change. And the truth is, in fact, a good organization, like a strong nation, must be able to see when it should change, not change its mission, not change its values, but the way that it carries out that mission or the way it enforces those values. In fact, our nation will have to change some of the ways it enforces its values, since we've now learned that even senior leaders have chosen to ignore them. We can no longer trust that a president, a senator, an attorney general will simply do the right thing unless there are specific guardrails and laws in place. And even then, we can't trust them to do that. After the terror attacks of September 11th, the FBI had to engage in strategic change. It had to go from being a great investigative agency, an agency that was very good at telling you what happened after it happened, to become a powerful intelligence agency that could predict and prevent bad things from happening. To do that, the FBI completely changed its approach to its mission of protecting the nation. But its mission and its values remained consistent. There's beauty to rigorous consistency. At FBI headquarters, for example, the day begins early with briefings at the highest level on what happened overnight and what is planned for the day. Then the attorney general is briefed, then the president, and there are evening briefings as well. It's not just bureaucratic routine. It's a proven, time-worn battle rhythm that works. And sticking with what works, with the values and practices that got you, that got us this far, is especially essential when you're under severe stress, as a person, as a group, even as a nation. The kind of severe life and death stress the FBI is under every day, the kind of existential stress our democracy is under today. You know, I was the on-scene commander of the nation's first anthrax murder in Boca Raton, Florida in 2001. I eventually led the largest hazardous materials crime scene in FBI history, a 3-story office building filled with deadly anthrax spores. We could have thrown up our hands and said, "This is unprecedented. This has never happened before. We have to throw the rules out. We have to find a different way to address this." But instead, we asked ourselves some basic questions. Is this a crime scene? Yes. Are we really good at crime scenes? Yes, we are. Is this a hazardous materials scene? Yes. Have we been trained to gather evidence in a hazmat environment? Yes, we have. So let's stick with what we know and get this done. Let's ask some of the same questions about our nation. Are we a democracy? Yes, we are. Is that freedom worth fighting for? Yes, it is. Is our democracy in peril? Yes, it is. Do we understand the basic tenets of our democracy? Free and fair elections, unfettered access to secure voting, respect for the rule of law and our institutions, 3 equal branches of government. We understand that. Okay, then, let's do this. Let's get the job done. Now and in the midterm elections and beyond. Let's all stand up for our code. Let's be the conservators we need to be in this moment in history. I'll tell you this, the far-right extremists have a strategy. The violent group known as the Proud Boys has told its members they are, quote, going local. showing up at tense school board meetings over mask requirements and a fabricated fear of something called critical race theory, threatening local election officials. Steve Bannon, who has purchased a home in the Greater Tucson area, who has been indicted for refusing to comply with a subpoena from the Select Committee, has articulated what he calls a precinct by precinct strategy to penetrate and take over county and state election administration offices. 1 in 3 local election officials surveyed last year said they feel unsafe because of their jobs. Reuters has identified almost 1,000 threats against local election officials. Former President Trump said the quiet part out loud when he stated recently, quote, "Sometimes the vote counter is more important than the candidate." By the way, that's a quote believed to be from Joseph Stalin. So what does that mean? It means in part that the GOP has a plan for the midterm elections that includes not having to actually win, but rather to create enough doubt and confusion about the vote tally that a large percentage of people won't believe the outcome. You know, we've seen this just in the last 24 hours. It's been reported with regard to the Pennsylvania primary that President Trump has contacted Dr. Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz, who last I heard, unless something has changed, is essentially in a dead tie that's going to require a recount. President Trump told Dr. Oz reportedly, "Just say you won. Just say you won." That's the strategy. And in key Senate races like those in Arizona, in Georgia, and in Florida, we may see that kind of confusion, even chaos, even possibly violence. So what's our strategy? I'm not talking about just a Democratic Party strategy. I've never been a political person. This threat we face is so much bigger than politics. I see it as a national security threat. It's an existential threat to our democracy. So what's the strategy for any American who gives a damn about whether we'll have a democracy 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 40 years from now? Well, engage, donate, volunteer, sacrifice time, energy, money, speak out, run for local office, write letters until they're sick of you writing letters to your representatives and op-ed pieces to newspapers. They count those calls and letters at your elected representatives' offices. They read the op-ed paper, the columns and letters. Tell them it's long past time, for example, that we regulated social media. Ask them if they are for or against gun violence. It's a simple question, right? Ask them what they're doing about it. Tell them that the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, has not had a leader for 7 years. And it's time to vote and confirm President Biden's nominee to head ATF, Steve Dettelbach. Show up at rallies and protests. Speak truth in the face of conspiracy theories and lies, even when it's not pleasant, even when it's in your own family, your own neighborhood, your own organization. Teach your grandchildren what democracy means, what threats to democracy look like. Model the kind of actions you want them to take someday, the kind of actions you may want them to take right now. Our democracy is a fragile experiment. You've heard this before. When scientists conduct an experiment that begins to go poorly for them, perhaps going in directions they never anticipated, they don't abandon the experiment. In fact, they double down on sound scientific method so they can at least defend the outcome and preserve what matters most to their experiment. I get asked all the time if we're going to get through this seemingly unprecedented time of polarization and division, and even disdain for what we believe to be democracy. I remind those people that ask me that our nation has survived a civil war, presidential assassinations, impeachments, a violent Vietnam protest era, an explosive civil rights movement. I don't have all the answers, but I do know this. If we consistently champion our democratic values, stick with what we're supposed to stand for, we will make it through to the other side. Maybe we'll look a little different, and maybe that's okay. Maybe we'll even be a bit stronger, but we can make it. Preserving values, preserving democracy is a team sport, and it's time for all of us to get in the game.
Our Vice President Michael Bryan of DGT asks, how do we get to the left of boom on threats against democracy, like the FBI did with terrorism, given so many of the threats are considered by many to be legitimate political discourse and free speech and association? Do we need new laws or institutions?
Wow, I don't know the person who asked that question, but it would be as if I slipped them $20 to ask it, because this is we could go on all night. So I'll give you the Reader's Digest condensed version. We've got a problem here, and it's I had a column out today at an MSNBC Daily. You can find it at that site on this very topic. Look, we have no domestic terrorism law in this country. Most people don't understand that. If you ask most people, is it against the law to commit domestic terrorism? They'll say, yes, of course it is. And the reality is, no, it's not. We have a definition of domestic terrorism, but we don't have a law against it. We have laws against international terrorism. And you say, well, what does it have to do with anything? What's the importance of that? Well, you get to this left of boom. I don't know how many of you know this concept of left of boom. It's really a law enforcement intelligence term, which means getting to a bad act before it blows up, right? Getting to the bomb and diffusing it before the bomb goes off. Left of boom. If you're right of boom, cleaning up the wreckage, it's too late. And that's what we've been doing on the domestic terrorism side. That's what we did at the Capitol on January 6th. We were cleaning up the wreckage. So what's the problem? And what's the difference? Why have we been so successful in stopping iconic acts of international terrorism post 9/11, but we're not able to do it seemingly with regard to the domestic problem and violent extremism? Well, look, a couple of things. One is the laws passed after 9/11, the laws that have been in place actually for decades regarding international terrorism, allow law enforcement, particularly the FBI, to get out in front, to use your association with groups and organizations like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, Hezbollah, Hamas, you name them throughout history. Your association with those folks, particularly the more violent identified leaders of terrorist acts, gets you into an FBI investigation, right? And here come the undercover agents, here come the informants, here come the FISA court-ordered wiretaps, all of that left of boom before something bad happens. And we can get in there. But now start talking about U.S. citizens. And we have something we value and cherish, and rightly so, and that's called free speech and civil liberties. So this tension exists, understandably, in our country between security and freedom. And so we don't want Big Brother spying on and having informants in this meeting, for example. We don't want, National Security Agency taking this live feed and figuring out whether Frank said bad things or good things. We don't want that. But there's a gap in there, right? There's a gray area where we need people to come out and say, this person's planning violence. But I don't think anyone's quite comfortable saying, wait a minute, you have to wait for the bad guys in a militia group to go rat each other out to the FBI? Is that what we have to wait for? So how do we get in there left of boom? That is the challenge. And I say, let's start at least with passing a domestic terrorism law that says, basically reads identically to the international terrorism law, just says if you do it here to us, amongst us, you're committing domestic terrorism. And let's get the investigative toolkit that the FBI needs to allow proactive work in people who are contemplating violence. But look, there's no easy solution to this. The Buffalo shooter was online posting his manifesto. I've read it, or most of it. And most of it was perfectly legal rhetoric. Vile, disgusting, wrong, but legal. So where do we go with this? I do want to see a lot more regulation of social media. You know that not only did he post his manifesto, he live streamed his attack at the supermarket on a platform called Twitch. Why can't the social media platforms step up and own some of this? Why can't Congress call them what they are, a public utility? They are not media. They are a public utility that cries out for regulation. The more responsible CEOs in Silicon Valley say, please regulate us. We can't do this anymore. They actually have said this. We need help. We need regulation. I'll tell you, we need even more advanced algorithms at those places that tell their security people, someone in Buffalo, New York is talking about violence, or somebody over here is using these magic words that are triggering our algorithm. Those algorithms exist, but not across the industry. And certainly it's way too late when they pick up the phone and call law enforcement. So we've got to get our hand around social media. We've got to pass a domestic terrorism law. And we've got to hold people accountable, even civilly, where it hurts. Really, think about it. There already has been talk that the victim families out of that Buffalo supermarket tragedy are already thinking about lawsuits for those who incited this, the people on cable TV, the platforms that allow this stuff to go on unfettered. Good. Sometimes that's the way you wake people up.
Our board member Jeannie Christie asked, what do you think of the PA governor candidate who wants to completely erase voter files and make folks register all over again?
We've got someone in that race that you've just mentioned. More importantly, he's butchering democracy, because we have someone now who seems to be the standard bearer in Pennsylvania for the Republican Party, who actually participated in the January 6th riot. I'm not talking about just showing up at the rally. He's a participant. And so that's where our nation is. Remember the quote from President Trump in my comments earlier, that you really don't have to, it's all about the vote counter, not the vote outcome. That's what you're talking about here in Pennsylvania, is they're going, and this is not just Pennsylvania, this is everywhere, Texas, Arizona, Georgia, Florida. Let's control the vote counters so we don't necessarily have to worry as much about the vote outcome. Even in Florida, Governor DeSantis has created a police organization, the voting police, so to speak, that will, quote unquote, ensure voter security. That's absolute nonsense. There's no additional need for additional law enforcement to do that in any state. He's creating a secret police force to control the vote. So that's how desperate this situation has become. That's the strategy that we just talked about, is not necessarily to win, but rather to control how votes are counted so that you can cast doubt and win illegitimately if you have to.
So Betsy asks, law seems to find the Black Lives Matter protesters, eco-protesters, and they arrest them, adding charges, making it seem worse than it is. But they seem to be reluctant to do the same thing to the Proud Boys and to the militias. What's your comment about that?
So I think it's that is a statement that states the obvious. We've had a problem in this country viewing people who look like us as a threat. And I'll be the first one to say that law enforcement has had that problem, perhaps more than any other institution in our country. The other is always the threat. It's easier when someone has different skin color or worships differently or speaks different languages than you do to view them as a threat. Now, I am somewhat hopeful here. Why? Well, we've had 800 people arrested, the vast majority of them white, by the way, the vast majority of them white males, by the way, many of them, so last time I looked, 13%, 14% with prior military or law enforcement experience, 800 arrested for their participation so far in the January 6th violence. So can we correct course? Yes, we are correcting course. Has the FBI director said on the Hill that the most lethal threat they face within domestic terrorism is race-based hatred? Yes. And did he say in public, did he say that is white supremacist ideology? Yes, he did. So are they reversing course? Yes. Does it take a tragedy to do it sometimes? Yes, apparently so. But that's where we are right now. So the good news is the accountability is happening there. I know people keep saying, well, when this is a steady mantra on social media, when are they going to arrest people who, beyond the 800 participants in the day of January 6th? Listen, there are clues and signs out there. We have a grand jury sitting, for those of you who may not know, and I know this is a savvy group, but there's a grand jury sitting in the District of Columbia on the planning and preparations of January 6th. There's a very experienced United States attorney out of Maryland who's been selected to oversee that case. We've heard Merrick Garland say he'll follow the facts anywhere. Just last week, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, the number 2 person at DOJ, Lisa Monaco, gave a talk at the University of Chicago, and I paid special attention. She was asked about the strategy in tackling the January 6th investigation, and she said, "Well, we've arrested 800 people," and then the moderator said, "Okay, well, what's next?" And she said, "Quote, we work our way up." Unquote. That DOJ, you may have heard in the last 24 hours, was it 48 hours? DOJ has asked the select committee for its transcripts, all of them, all of its work. DOJ is ready for that, to receive that. That's going to eventually happen. Things are happening. Do we wish it happened yesterday? Yeah, we do. But I think accountability is coming.
Another question here from the audience, from Maria Hidalgo. What else? What more can the Biden administration do to provide clarity on what it's going to take to preserve our democracy?
Well, again, you've heard me say I'm very careful surviving on TV by not pretending to know things I don't know about. So I'm not a politician. Despite what many people think about the FBI, because President Trump had made them think it. The FBI, is an apolitical organization. People don't gather around the water cooler at FBI headquarters and talk about politics. They talk about their kids and the football game and all of that stuff. So for 25 years of my career, I didn't give political advice, but I do have to say that with regard to this administration, the number one thing that can happen is accountability and consequences. We've had a president in the past, haven't we, who picked up the phone and told the attorney general what to do. We don't want that anymore. We don't want that interference. And I think Joe Biden has been extremely careful about not interfering. Sometimes, by the way, even to his own detriment. As an aside here, I think, for example, that the Centers for Disease Control could have been a lot better at communicating things regarding the pandemic and vaccines, and I think Biden stayed out of it. I think Biden said, I'm not going to interfere like the last guy. I'm not going to tell you, how to message this. He's leaving it to the professionals, sometimes even when it's not the best idea. But with regard to the number one thing this administration can do is allow DOJ to do its job and hold people accountable swiftly and surely. You don't want to get these kinds of prosecutions wrong. We heard today, I'm just catching up on the news after a day of travel, but we heard today that the select committee is asking yet another member of Congress to show up and talk about the tours he gave of the Capitol building just before January 6th. That's the first sign that all these rumors that there were tours given of participants in the violence, that somebody in Congress gave tours to these people. Well, the Republicans have been saying, no, not true, not true. Now, maybe if you read the letter to the congressman from the committee, it says, everybody's saying it didn't happen, but we have evidence to the contrary. That's a quote. We have evidence to the contrary. So that's the best thing. And then I'm going to stay out of the political advice because, you get what you pay for.
So kind of going along with that same question, Margaret Vaughn asked, do you think that we can preserve our democracy if we can't hold Trump and his supporters in Congress responsible for their actions?
I know I ended my talks on a positive note, but on the caveat, do you throw in with the scenario that we hold no one accountable? I would become very worried for the future of the democracy. I know that sounds dour and dark, but if you look throughout history, democracies don't always survive. It's not a given. As I said, it's a fragile experiment. There are cycles to democracies. They slowly over time. They ebb and flow. And it requires, we talked about a conservancy tonight. It requires that kind of constant vigilance, that constant watering and feeding, right? And not saying it's somebody else's job. When I was living in Tucson just until recently, people would stop me at Whole Foods or Costco or wherever, Bashas'. Frank, when's the FBI going to do this? When's the White House going to do this? And I kept saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because it's not somebody else's job. Don't sit back and cross your fingers. Hope is not a plan, right? Get some action, because let me tell you, the bad guys out there, whether they're international terrorists or domestic violent extremists, they've got a plan.
What kind of work needs to be done to de-radicalize these folks? I mean, do we engage them? Do we try to fight back on the misinformation?
Boy, what a dilemma this is. There's been some expert work that we can draw upon on the international terrorism side, right? Because you want to talk about studying radicalization and seeing young men, mostly men, 18, 19, 20 years old, within weeks. I mean, 9-10 weeks, we were seeing young men in the United States online. Think about Buffalo. So think about the comparison here. The young man, 18 in Buffalo, New York, what does he say in his manifesto? During COVID, I was online, mostly on a platform called 4chan. I learned all about this truth, so-called truth of white replacement theory. We're all being replaced. It's all an evil strategy. And really, within about a year, less, he's radicalized. He's ready to go to kill himself. He's ready to become a martyr if necessary. Same thing we see happen on international terrorism, violent jihadists, believing in something greater than themselves. So how do you counter radicalization? Yes, you've got to speak the truth. Yes, you've got to hammer the truth in. Yes, you have to be in painful dialogue with people you violently disagree with. Yes, you do. When you write them off, they go into the echo chamber and the rabbit hole even deeper when you cut off communications. It's horrible. I don't recommend that. And I know it's difficult. Also, know the other side. And I know this is difficult, but I make myself, because I'm in the business, I make myself watch all the networks, including Fox. Even I'll find, what's the other, Newsmax, or, I'll make myself listen to a Trump rally to see what the thought process is, if there's even any thought. Why? It's important. It's important to counter it. You can't counter it if you don't know what they're thinking. And so here's the problem, though. We are in a society where you say, well, Frank, you're talking about teaching kids in school to be more savvy consumers of social media. You want to teach them more about democracy. We can't even agree on critical race theory, which, by the way, is largely not taught in in elementary schools or high schools in the United States. Florida has banned math books because they contain something that looks like critical race theory to them. It's unbelievable. So how do you get curriculum in the school? How do you get people talking about something and agreeing on something? It's extremely hard, but we have to take the same counter-radicalization practices we've tried with international terrorism, giving people something else to belong to, right? Young people are looking to join a cause. People coming out of the military are looking for a fight. They're looking for a cause bigger than themselves. They have channeled their energy in very patriotic ways. They come out, and what do we do with them? Why so many former veterans in Oath Keepers? Why so recruitable? Why so easily radicalized? Why are we not capturing that energy, that skill set, that devotion to duty, and doing something else with it, something better with it? That has to happen. Capture that radicalization period that happens from 18 to 25 and get out in front of it. In the international terrorism realm, there has been success in giving young people something else to belong to, whether it's a summer job, whether it's whatever it is, get them into a fight that's not killing people. That kind of thing has to happen.
Great, thank you. So just changing gears here just a little bit, Dee wants to know, which leaders do you admire?
I don't know if we're talking about historically or current events, but let me just say in the short term, right in front of us, I don't care where you are on the political spectrum, and we may disagree with almost everything they stand for politically, but when you look at Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and the intestinal fortitude it takes for them to do what they're doing, you've got to look at that and go, that's courageous. Now, maybe there's a secret plan that they're going to parlay this into, running for office. Great, good. I don't care. But I just say, I will call out courage when I see it. And they are taking a beating in their party. And I know how difficult that is. And we need more people like that. Don't forget, this is a bipartisan committee. The Republicans can never say, they try to say it every day, this is a one-party committee. No, it's not. No, I do respect those two people for what they're doing.
Nice. Kind of going toward the next election, Bonnie Heidler, who is our chairperson for the Pima County Democratic Party, she just wants to know, do you think with all the gerrymandering that's going on here in Arizona and other states, do you think it's mathematically impossible for the Democrats to win where we need to win to hold our majority and improve on it?
I fear that it could become impossible, particularly when you throw in a low voter turnout where it needs to happen. And that I think that's the greatest concern there is when you've got gerrymandering plus an environment, and who knows what the environment will look like at the time, but an environment where there's poor voter turnout plus the restrictions really around the state, around the country. This isn't just Arizona. My gosh, Texas has really, Texas and Florida you want to talk about mathematical impossibilities? That could be the case in those states. I mean, just it looks like someone took a blender to voting districts and carved them up. And so, yes. Now, what could really be the voter turnout? You talk about what can Democrats do, and this is where I'm not a paid political consultant by any means, but what could the environment look like that causes people to just shrug and not show up? The economy, all the experts are saying the economy is going to be much worse. The stock market's going to be worse. It's an environment where credibility of the election process, people don't believe their vote will even count. That turns people off. I'm not sure it's going to get counted. Again, that's all the GOP has to do. Yep. You know what? Those drop boxes, we're going to go to court on every single drop box. We're not going to count. Yeah, well, I'm not going. Do I have to stand in line? I have to tell you, do I want to stand in line for 5 hours? No, I do not. I do not. And now throw in the rain or whatever. This is a serious problem. And if I told you I listen to Fox because I have to sometimes. The mantra on there in the evenings is something's wrong with you if you don't stand in line to vote, right? They want it to be a bad thing to do early voting, mail-in voting, and drop boxes. Bad. You're un-American if you don't stand in line. Well, you know what that means. You know what the data there is, right? It's Republicans who stand in line. I still don't really get this, but it's a working class, the Democrats, minorities who, they don't have the time to stand in line. Yes, they're going to vote early. Yes, they're going to use a drop box. It's smart. Why wouldn't you? And this is where this is going. And I'll tell you, that mantra is increasing every night. Drop box is bad. Standing in line, good. You're going to see this ratchet up right to the midterms. There's a plan there to do something with early voting and the drop boxes.
So there's several questions here in the chat that just about how some of the really bad candidates that we have here in Arizona, we know of them across the whole country. And do you think the combination of the gerrymandering and the voter suppression, but do you think that these candidates, even as crazy and as far out as they are going to get elected?
I think we're seeing a mixed bag from the primaries we've just seen. I mean, there's good news, bad news. The guy you just mentioned in Pennsylvania, Mastriani, or whatever his name is, he's really potentially dangerous in terms of his extremism. And when I say that, I mean violent extremism. I don't see him denouncing what happened on January 6th. I see him having participated in it. What's the good news? All right, you can be too crazy even for crazies. So Madison Cawthorn in North Carolina, he's out, right? He got too crazy for his own party. Now he had the audacity to embarrass them. Now they're hard to embarrass. So, but he did it and they called him out on it and he's done. Now today he's called for everybody to go, quote, what he calls dark MAGA. It's time for everybody to go dark MAGA, which implies, I think, violence. But so my answer to that question, yes, absolutely disturbing candidates who aren't denouncing violence can get in, aren't denouncing conspiracy theories, disproven lies can get in. Some positive signs, at some point, you can embarrass your own party enough that they'll drop you like a hot rock.
The next question is do you think the Republican Party, that grand old party that we all grew up with, can recover from this period?
We need two healthy parties in this country. We do. We need civil discourse. We need to go back to the days where we disagreed on how much the Pentagon budget should be. We need to go back to those nice days when we talked about, how far we should go in foreign policy to spread democracy, right? And here we are fighting each other in the streets. I think it's going to take a very, very long time. Why do I say that? There are people waiting in the wings. This is no longer just about, when Trump goes away. Remember when we'd say, well, the threat's going to go away when Trump moves on or eventually passes. Well, guess what? No, there's a line forming. There's a line forming. And some of them, I'll be honest with you, some of them are far, far brighter than President Trump. Far brighter. We're talking the Harvard, Yale law. These people are not only buying into violence and lies, but they're really smart. And that should concern everybody.
So we're going to change gears here a little bit and kind of go back to your law enforcement days. A lot of us are very concerned about what's happening with abortion rights and women's rights. And states are putting up roadblocks so that women can't get what they need. So women are crossing state lines. How do you think local prosecutors and jailers are going to handle this? Because women are going to cross lines if they can get a safe abortion in the next state. Or is it going to be just a big mess?
Big mess is almost a guarantee. So yes, states, for those who are not tuned into exactly what these issues entail, it's actually rather fascinating legal concepts that are troubling. But yet, for a law school classroom would be very interesting. So, for example, there are states that want to or have already or are contemplating making it illegal to engage in travel to, so a state that has outlawed abortion, going one step further and saying, not only are we outlawing abortion here, but we're going to outlaw your travel to another state to get an abortion that is perfectly legal in that other state. You may say, oh, that's ridiculous. That would never fly. Well, let me tell you something. On the federal side, there are analogous laws. By that, I mean, for example, there are situations where the U.S. government asserts authority over an American citizen traveling abroad to commit a crime in another country. For example, I've arrested people for international travel to engage in sex with a minor, interstate travel to engage with sex with a minor. So the international travel part is fascinating because if you think, I've thought this through, as we prosecute those cases, this is very interesting. We're taking an American citizen and we're saying you're in that airspace where you're getting on the plane and traveling, you somehow are committing a crime because you're going somewhere else to commit a crime that may not even be a crime over there, by the way, right? But we're calling it a crime. And so now if Texas says you can't have an abortion here and you can't travel, it's theoretically possible that the Texas Rangers or Highway Patrol would arrest a woman or perhaps a doctor for the travel while she's still in travel status or having travel. So it sounds silly, but there are legal concepts that could allow that to happen. Now, in Texas, several weeks ago, there was a woman you may have heard who was arrested. It didn't hold. The charges were dropped by a district attorney, but she was arrested for a self-induced abortion, and she was arrested for homicide. And it was a poor minority woman, and the DA dropped the charges, but the sheriff arrested her for homicide. So you mentioned a mess. Yes, we're in for a mess.
Mm. One question here that warms my heart. We want to know if you're running for office.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you, I think, for whoever asked that question. I wrestle with this kind of thing. The short answer is no. It would take a lot of convincing. I think I have an audience and a following through a weekly column, a weekly podcast, well over 1,000 appearances on national television, a best-selling book, another book in the works. I feel like I'm getting something done. And I hate to sound pessimistic about Congress and the House and the Senate, but there isn't a whole lot getting done there that's contributing to the betterment of society. So I have to weigh that out, and I'm just not inclined. And people have told me, well, maybe that's a good thing that you don't like politics, but I disdain it. I disdain it, and that's just the truth. That's where I'm at. Thank you, everybody, for having me here. Larry, for the very kind invitation.
Frank, I want to thank you very much for this insightful presentation. We very much appreciate your time this evening. And I think it's a clarion call for all people who believe in democracy to get active in the Democratic Party, start knocking on doors, start all of the things you suggested. Just start to get active, do something, don't yell at the TV. And you've given us a lot to think about. And I just wonder, one final question. What is the best way to follow your commentary?
Well, my website is frankfigliuzzi.com. That's all one word, frankfigliuzzi.com. You can follow me on Twitter if you're on Twitter at frankfigliuzzi1. And the neat thing about the website and pretty much the Twitter account is I load or someone loads virtually everything I do onto the website. So the columns you can get there, or you can sign up to MSNBC Daily and get my columns. But they're all there. The podcasts every week are there. You know, I've got a podcast called The Bureau with Frank Figliuzzi that at one point had gotten into the top 25 podcasts in true crime. But we talk about everything. I've had Chuck Rosenberg on, and I've had Rachel Vindman on, and I had just recently, like last week, I had the wife of Stuart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers organization. She is divorcing him, or trying to, and she was fascinating. Those are the kinds of guests that we get. So yeah, the website, frankfigliuzzi.com, you'll get everything there.
Thank you for everybody who showed up and supported our fundraiser. And Frank, thank you very much. Wish you all the best going forward. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.